Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Saturday, May 10th, 2025, and on Saturdays we talk about sports and interject a bit of humor. Today I want to combine two interesting, separate and yet related issues. You'll see what I mean in a moment. First, let's start with Felix Baumgartner. Does that name ring a bell to anyone? Probably not. But he's the chap who jumped literally from the stratosphere, or the highest altitude ever, at least at that point in history, back on October 14th, 2012. So what happened? Well, he performed this historic feat as part of the Red Bull Stratus Challenge, sponsored by, of course, the company. And essentially what happened was, and you can check out the video below, I'll include a link so you can actually watch what happened in greater depth and detail. But Baumgartner ascended into the stratosphere by way of a specialized helium balloon with essentially a space capsule of sorts attached. And so then, he prepared, and as he got ready, and he worked with Mission Control Tower, and they walked him through the different steps, etc. And then he stood up at the edge of the platform and he jumped. And he jumped from a then world record, basically 39 kilometers up, or 24.2 miles roughly. And he then engaged in a free fall. So he just literally fell unencumbered for the next 36.4 kilometers. Before deploying his parachute for the final 2.6 kilometers. Just an incredible feat. And so he set the world records at the time, and for the fastest free fall, which included a speed of 1,350, just under 1,358 kilometers per hour, or just under 844 miles per hour. So that means he was the first human to ever go supersonic. Literally, to break the sound barrier outside of a man-made vehicle. His total time of free falling was 4 minutes and 19 seconds. And since then, I should note, a couple of years later, his record for the highest jump was broken by Alan Eustace, who jumped from a height of just about 41.4 kilometers on October 24th, 2014. But I mentioned Baumgartner's jump because it's an outstanding achievement, stemming from, in part, the roughly $30 million investment by the corporate sponsor Red Bull. Baumgartner himself was a reasonably well-known, and he's still around, base jumper, and he's done a few other things, interesting jumps over the years. But in this particular jump, the idea was that Baumgartner was going to set the world records, right, intentionally, for the highest skydive on record and the fastest free fall speed, both of which, of course, he achieved. So while the jump generated, untold amounts of publicity for Red Bull, allegedly it increased their profits, generating millions of dollars in revenues, etc. But apparently Baumgartner, he himself didn't really benefit financially. He gained, obviously, fame and recognition, but he hasn't really distinguished himself outside of that particular jump. And he's actually been something of a controversial figure in terms of some of his actions and his political views outside of his jumping career, shall we say. But that's not my interest here. Rather, it's the notion of challenging the limits of what humans can do and what they can accomplish. Now, in this case, more or less physically or through sports, different physical or sports challenges. I've always been interested in world records, probably dating back, maybe you had this experience as well, but as a child, as a youngster, I'm thinking back to the first copy that I had of the Guinness Book of World Records. And I own that I don't know the exact year as such, but I remember probably around 1971, 72, early 1970s. And yet the really cool issue for me isn't just all the amazing world records of different kinds that human beings can set or have set. But for me, I've been more interested in the athletic accomplishments, both in terms of the individual events and the competitions that people engage in, all the way up through team sports. So that's what's always held my fascination, like the undefeated 1972 Miami Dolphins back in the day, right? Or the Golden State Warriors, who went 73-9 in the 2015-16 regular season. So they set the record for the most basketball wins in a season, and then only to go on to lose. They had a 3-1 lead in the finals in a best-of-7 series against Cleveland. They went on to lose that series and lose the championship to the LeBron James-led Cleveland Cavaliers. And so the Cavs won their only basketball championship that year, which was also Cleveland's first major sporting title since the Cleveland Browns, the football team, won the NFL championship back in 1964. Now, back to Baumgartner. The highest jump and the longest free fall that Baumgartner achieved, these probably or don't necessarily fit neatly into what we might call a sporting accomplishment per se. Certainly a world record at the time, but I'm not sure how much of a sport that would involve. That definitely involves some training, and you could make a case, but I'm more interested in the feat mainly because of the incredible amount of planning and preparation and teamwork that went into accomplishing that world record. No one achieves anything great, truly great, only by oneself. So what do I mean? As mentioned, the jump required, for example, $30 million of investment by Red Bull, including all of the aerospace engineers, the technicians, the mission control specialists, all of the hardware that had to be manufactured, all of the computer software and communication technologies, and much more. So, Baumgartner set the world record, but of course, this also involved countless other people and countless millions of dollars to help him get there. Even the family and friends or co-workers who supported Baumgartner to allow him to train and to prepare for his historic feat can take some credit. So in general, you can think of it this way. Everyone who helped to raise you, care for you, taught you your language, your basic skills, nurtured those special abilities maybe that you displayed early on. All of these things and all of these people helped play a part in your greatest achievements. And I don't mean to make light of anyone's individual efforts or sacrifices or belittle their true genius, whatever that might look like. So, in general, my point is simply that if you're going to do something amazing in whatever field, you almost always needed other kinds of people in your corner in order to reach that point, in order to achieve that greatest success, whatever that might look like in your life or in my life. So, and then in terms of sports and human capacities, we really don't know literally what are the ultimate limits of what humans can do. And so just to give another example, and I want to shift to the marathon concept, I'm stunned to this day that the elite distance runners in the world today, for example, can run a full marathon in just over 2 hours. Right? So a full marathon, the distance-wise, that's 26.2 miles or 42.2 kilometers, whichever you prefer. And they can run this distance, as I say, in just over 2 hours. So the current world record for the full marathon is 2 hours, 0 minutes, and 35 seconds on the men's side, set by Kenyan Kelvin Kiptum in the 2023 Chicago Marathon. Happened on October 8th, 2023. And in case you don't know, haven't done the calculation, that works out to be about 4 minutes and 36 seconds per mile for 26 consecutive miles without stopping. So to me, that's just incredible. Tragically, by the way, Kiptum died just a few months later on February 11th of 2024 at the tender age of 24. And coincidentally, some of you may know Steve Prefontaine, the famous distance runner out of Eugene, Oregon, from the early 1970s. He also died in a car accident at the same age of 24, but again, almost a half century earlier back in 1975. But who knows how fast these greats might have run had their lives not been taken so soon. So, and by the way, the women's world marathon record was just set a few months ago as well. It was just achieved in last year's 2024 Chicago Marathon by Kenyan Ruth Chepngetich in 2 hours, 9 minutes, and 56 seconds. So again, on the women's side, and that works out to about 4 minutes and 57 seconds per mile for 26 miles. So I mentioned that because I have actually run a 4:57 mile, but that's just for 1 mile, not 26. Again, and this is when I was, and then I wanted to mention too in terms of the marathon. So I decided, because I did like sports and I liked running, and I was in this transition period between being a U.S. citizen and coming up to Canada, and I was waiting for my permanent residency card to come through. By the way, it took about 2 years in total. Anyway, that's another story. But I decided during that time to start training for a marathon. So I was in, decent enough shape, but I'd never trained for running or been a serious runner in my life. So I bought a copy of the Runner's World magazine, and I looked up a proposed training schedule for a marathon. And basically, it outlined exactly how many miles you needed to run each day, building gradually, week by week, to increase your strength and endurance, with 1 day off each week, by the way, on Mondays. And that was for rest and recovery. And that made sense because, as a logical recovery day, because the long runs were always scheduled for Sundays. So then you got the Monday off. So anyway, it was, as I said, it was a 12-week training program. So basically I went from scratch, not really running much outside of playing a little basketball or whatever I was doing for exercise. But I decided to sort of, hunker down and just train seriously for a marathon. So the first week involved about 25 total miles of running. And then the total mileage and the length of the runs gradually increased week by week. And so by the 9th week, the long Sunday run was 18 miles. So again, remember, a marathon is about 26 miles or 42 kilometers. And so that 18-mile run, I actually did it twice, and it's part of the training schedule. And that was the longest I ever ran up to that point. So anyway, I set a goal then of trying to run the marathon in under 3 hours. I thought if I could break 3 hours, that would be incredible. All right, pretty good for a novice recreational runner. And well, as it turns out, running a marathon was even more of a challenge than I realized. So I completed the 12 weeks of training, but turns out that wasn't really enough. What do I mean? Well, it started out well enough. I did reasonably well. I was hanging in there. I ran the first half of the marathon in 1 hour and 29 minutes. So again, think of the goal of 3 hours. It means you need to run the first half in 1 hour 30, the second half in 1 hour 30. Okay. So the problem was as I passed through the halfway point, I was under the 1 hour and 30 minutes, which was good, but I was also tired. And psychologically, I'd already told myself, man, there's no way you can do this again, run another half marathon in under 1 hour 30. So unfortunately, I was already mentally or psychologically sort of defeated. So I kept the pace up as best I could through about 18, 19 miles or so. So I was still under that sort of sub 3 hour pace. And then I really started to feel it. And I started to slow down just a little bit. And by about mile 24 out of the 26, I was pretty exhausted. And at that point, my form was starting to break down. I was really starting to fall apart. And so I knew, the good news is that I knew I was still going to finish. But I also knew that this was going to be quite a struggle for those last couple of miles. And besides, I was now at about 2 hours and 50 minutes. And I knew there was no way I was going to run 2 miles, the final 2 miles, in under 10 minutes. So I knew the 3 hour goal was out. And in fact, I ended up slowing to about 8 minutes and 30 seconds per mile on average for those last 2 miles. So that took me an incredibly painful 17 minutes to finish those last 2 miles, right? And so again, bear in mind, up to that point or close to that point, at least for the first 20 miles, I was trying to average just under 7 minutes per mile for the 26 miles. And as I say, I was sort of on pace up until about maybe mile 19. And I knew by mile 20, I was slightly outside of the pace and I was slowing down. But those last 2 miles were absolutely brutal. But, I knew I'd hang in there and I'd finish, and I did. So my finishing time was 3 hours and 7 minutes and something seconds. So I ran the first half in an hour and 29 something, and I ran the second half in an hour and 37 and something, but especially because of those last 2 miles. So I'd fallen short of my goal, but I was still pretty ecstatic because I completed the first marathon I'd ever tried, right? So that's pretty cool. Anyways, I did set some modest goals for running over the years, some of which I was able to achieve, others of which I ended up falling short and was never able to achieve. But anyway, I've been considering the idea then of taking on a new challenge recently, or especially as I edge closer to the official retirement age of 65. I don't see myself retiring at 65, but nonetheless, that's the official age. And I thought, what could I do? What challenge could I take on? What might I do at age 65? What would be really cool? But then my next thought was, well, wait a minute, Mikowski. If I do take on a challenge and I'm going to invest all that time and energy and effort, shouldn't I be using that energy and all of that time to benefit others as well? So in other words, I still love challenges, be they intellectual or emotional or physical. But if I'm going to spend a lot of time on a challenge, especially at this stage in my life, I'd like there to be some broader benefits beyond my own, selfish interests or ego or what have you. Okay. And so I think I've come up with an idea. I'm testing out a few things, have been testing out a couple of ideas and doing a couple of interesting training sessions of various kinds. And I think I have an idea of what that challenge might be. That, again, would both be a personal challenge, a grand ambition of sorts, but that would also have all kinds of different, longer term or social benefits or positive outcomes. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that for today. But if all goes well, and depending on what happens this week, I plan to make a pretty big announcement on next Saturday's vlog as to what this proposed challenge might be. All right, stay tuned. So in the meantime, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And I'll see you soon.